Hi there, this is Mike from Stagecoach Road Vintage Sewing Machine Restoration, and you walked in on part 3 of our restoration of this awesome old beige Singer Featherweight. It is a, gosh, what did I do with my glasses? There they are. I believe it's a 221J, but yes, 221J. We've cleaned the parts in the alcohol bath, scrubbed them, and then we polished them after they came out to get the last of the oil residue off. Because that old sticky oil is what bogs the machine down and keeps parts from freely moving against each other as they should. I'm gonna move through this rather quickly. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. So you may want to back it up and watch it over again, or watch sections of it over again. But our parts are washed and polished. The parts that remained on the machine, the parts have been flushed. All the movement points have been flushed, and the cams and forks and things have been cleaned of old sticky oil, and they've been lubricated. Look at this. What have we found here? Awesome. This is thread wrapped around behind the hook. And on featherweights, that's one of the things that can bog a machine down, because the tolerances are so close that fraction of a millimeter of thread in the wrong place can really tie things up. Haha, that was a pun. Okay, so cleaned and oiled and ready to go back together. This is the presser foot shaft that the presser bar usually lifts right up out through the top. On this machine, the presser bar is hollow, and unlike most Singers, unlike most machines where the presser bar is one solid piece and the spring goes over the outside of it, on this one the spring goes down inside. So this is a little larger diameter, and it will not come up through the hole in the top. So the only way to take it out is to take the hook and bobbin race off, take the presser bar out, clean the presser bar, put that back together, retying the machine, which is really unnecessary, because you can clean it in place and just move it down and make sure that you get everything, move it back up, get the whole thing cleaned up. Okay, the spring is going to go in, and it doesn't really require lubrication, but I put a little oil on the spring just because it's going to be sliding up and down inside of that hollow tube there. And I put a little bit of oil on the bar. There, see, now it just goes right down inside there, and your presser adjuster will move it up and down a little bit. Before we go too far, we want to put this piece on, and we want to put the, I'm going to take that back out, because if you put this back together in the wrong sequence, you end up taking it apart again. So you can get that one part in that goes back in behind everything else. We're going to start with this piece, which is the piece that when you raise your presser foot, it pushes the pin that releases the tension, so you can pull your project out without the thread flexing the needle and potentially bending it. There's a small shouldered screw that holds this on. Let's see, where are you? Must be this one. I don't know if you can see that little shoulder there, but the shoulder is so once the screw is tightened down, this piece can still move on it. If it didn't have that shoulder and it just pinched it up tight against there, you wouldn't be able to move. So this is going to get a drop of oil on the shoulder here, and a little bit on here just for good measure on the edges of the screw hole where it's going to ride against the body of the machine. Magnetizer. Pick one up at your local auto parts store for a few bucks. It'll make your life easier. Takes a little bit of getting used to using it, but once you do get used to it, it's a really handy tool. Okay, this is going to go on this way. You want to make sure that your spring is in place. And this part is going to ride on top of your presser foot lifter, and that's what's going to press your pin in. Make sure that the shoulder of your screw goes into the screw hole and not up against the screw hole. See, when you lift your presser foot lifter, it presses in where this pin will be inside here when we put the tension assembly back together. These linkages need to go in next because you can't get them in behind the presser bar once it's in place. Okay, this piece is the piece that goes into the little flywheel block on the end of your shaft. And it wants a drop of oil here where the link it goes through is going to ride on it. And then it's going to go into that hole there on the block. Right there is the set screw that's going to tighten that in place. And we ascertained before we took it off that this wants to be rotated in this direction. And now that set screw is going to push up against the flat spot on the shaft that's going into the block there. You access that screw, that set screw, through the hole in the casting over here. And since we didn't take it all the way out, just loosen it a few turns. It's not a struggle to get it back in. Okay. Oopsie. Guess we put the part in backwards. I did. don't want to take that set screw all the way out, but you have to turn it enough turns that the little shoulder on the end of the flat spot clears. Let's see. It's got to go this way. You can see that this one is a little bit longer than this end of the link, and this end of the link's got to be able to clear that block as it goes around, so the shorter side goes up against the block there. Okay, and again, I'll turn that in the direction that we sussed out before we took it apart. Tighten down the set screw. You don't want to push too hard on this piece as you're putting the set screw down, because it has to be able to rotate freely. And now the take-up lever goes up against, let's see, take-up lever is going to ride on the end of this, right here, this shoulder here that this link here is, this link here is going to ride on, and this piece will get the screw through it. Before we do that, we're going to put a drop of oil in here, and then work it a little bit until it moves freely. That's good. And then I'm going to put a little bit of oil into each of these holes. So take-up lever is going to be out here like this. The smaller hole is going to go on that shoulder, and this end of that link has this little thick flat washer behind it, and a little bit of a balancing act to get it in. So I usually put it up in there and then hold it in place with something while I get this link up in place, and then put something through the center of it to center that on there. Hold it while this bigger shouldered screw goes in it. And I got both hands full. I can still put a drop of oil on it. Want the drop of oil on the shoulder and also on the underside of the head of the screw. Again, you want to make sure that that shoulder goes into the hole and not just up against it, because it's got to be able to move freely on there once that screw is tight. And this link here, you remember that if you watched the last video, part 2, you'll remember that there was a reverse screw. This is it. You notice that the slot on this screw does not go all the way to the edges, and usually that denotes a reverse thread screw. And there's only one on this machine, and this is it. Want a little bit of oil there where it's going to go. Of course, we're going to put a little more oil on this after it's together, but this way you get the oil in there. And I munged up that screw slot just slightly as I was taking it out. And I've got some good quality jeweler's files that I can use to repair that damage. Not that it does any harm, but it looks a lot nicer if you clean it up. Okay, and now we screw it in just like we're trying to back it out. We're turning this counterclockwise, counterintuitively, and it's tight. See, all those shoulders allow these parts to move freely, even though the screws are tight around them. This hole here is for the needle clamp, which looks a lot like the top of a bicycle fork. Put a little bit of oil on that, even though we already put some oil in the hole. If you get too much oil, you can always blot it off. That's going to go in that way because you want to be able to access that screw. That's what tightens down your needle bar. I usually put a little bit of oil on the end of the needle bar just because it helps it to slide through. Goes down this shaft and through the clamp. On down through that lower hole. And a little more oil is going to help that go down in the most delightful way. Be careful about doing any damage to the insides of your pieces with hard steel. Scraping it. Okay, we'll get to tightening that in a minute. This is that pressure bar again, and I'm going to put just a little bit more oil on the shaft where it's going to go inside the lower tube there. See, the spring goes on down into that hollow pressure bar, and then the adjuster goes in the top. And you want a little bit of oil on there because this is a piece that's going to get moved, not frequently, but occasionally, and you don't want it to be a struggle for the person sewing. I'm going to just set the needle plate in there for a moment while I adjust the height of the pressure bar. The reason I'm doing it temporarily is that's part of the alignment of the hook, so we'll get to that. One edge of this thread cutter, it's just a piece of spring steel that's curly cued up to slide up onto the pressure bar. One edge is sharpened. That sharpened edge goes up. And you just work it up onto the pressure bar. Since the pressure bar is not held in place yet, you're going to have to put a thumb on it to hold it there. Just a little ways up. But it's got to be clear of this flat spot because that's where the pressure foot's going to go. The thumb screw for the pressure foot has a screwdriver slot in it. Pressure foot goes there, and the thumb screw goes through there into it. All right, let's go up a little bit. Make sure that your pressure foot is fitting snugly around that flat spot on the pressure bar. And we're going to start by just letting the pressure foot rest on the needle plate and tighten it down a little bit, not a lot. And you see it comes up quite a bit. That's a little bit too much, because as the needle bar comes down in its cycle, the needle clamp's going to strike that. So you want as much height as you can comfortably get without the needle clamp striking it. So with the pressure bar lifter in the up position, I'm going to lift this, roughly a ½ inch. And get it aligned straight. And tighten the screw. Now you can tighten it snugly because it should be perfectly in position. That's a little bit too much spring pressure. That's better. For heavy fabric, you'll want a little more spring pressure, but that's good for regular fabric. The needle clamp this is a common setup on some of the older singers. It has this is the thread guide on the needle clamp, and the top of the thread guide has a funny little drum shaped piece on it that has to there's a corresponding hole on the inside of the needle clamp, right where the clamp screw goes into it, and that little drum shaped thing has to go inside there, has to fit back into that little hole as you put it on, because otherwise it won't fit. Otherwise there's not room for the needle bar to slide into the hole. So now this part is the part that's usually a pain in the behind, but not too bad. You can do it. And I have it backwards. There we go. The bigger drum-shaped hole should face towards the inside of the machine, and this little tiny divot hole should face out. So usually what I do is I take a tiny screwdriver and I press that piece back in. You may be able to see it. That little drum-shaped thing is pressed back into that recess there. And then I can you will struggle to. Hopefully not as much as I had to struggle to learn how to do this. This is where magnetized screwdriver is less convenient. Okay, so I'm holding that little drum-shaped piece back into its recess and sliding this up onto the needle bar. There we go. All right, it's in place. And then there's a set screw that goes in the back. It's a little low-profile set screw with a dimple on the end. On the other side, of course, is a slot. The dimpled side goes in, and it's going to go into that little dimpled hole I pointed out on the needle bar. we go. Needle clamp is in place. And now we're going to time the needle bar. We'll take this out of our way. Put the needle in place. And I think this is one of the machines that the needle goes in reverse of how most singers go. All right. I think that the flat spot, on this one wants to face the end of the machine and not towards the center. There's a couple machines that thread from the inside out this way. And of course, in the moment here, I don't remember if this is one of them or not. Up, 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 out of my way. If it is, then the flat spot wants to be on this side. When the needle comes down, it comes into a recessed area in the hook, and so you have to have your needle bar up out of the way until your hook is turned into the correct position. The point of the hook, as you rotate, the hook goes around in this direction, and this outer point is not the point of the hook. The sharper inner point is. And as that point comes around, the needle bar should be just beginning its ascent back up into the machine. And that's where you want the eye of the needle and the point of the hook to cross each other. So we're going to bring the needle down. And the point of the hook wants to pass just a little less than 1/8 of an inch above the eye of the needle. That way it can pick up that slack thread where the thread goes through the needle. When you have it set right, the point of the hook will pass over the eye of the needle, and the needle will raise up out of that recess before the hook turns around enough again to hit the needle. Watch it while you work on it. I mean, watch it while you turn the hand wheel. Make sure that the needle is not hitting and getting bent. If it's hitting, you have to come up just a little bit more. That looks pretty good right there. Then we just tighten the screw on the needle clamp, and it's adjusted in place. Now there are marks on the needle bar that make it a little simpler if you want. When the needle is all the way in its down position, the upper of these two marks on the needle bar should be flush with the bottom of this shaft, whatever it is that it rides in. And as it comes back up, the second mark should be in line with that as the eye of the needle is passing the hook. Mine is not exactly lined up with that, but I like the way I do it better, so that's how it is. Okay, now that we have the needle bar timed, and also before you tighten this screw down, make sure that your needle clamp is straight. When the thumb screw that you tighten the needle with is facing directly back towards the wind's picking up. Make sure that your thumb screw faces directly back towards the center of the arm of the machine. That way your the eye of the needle is aligned correctly. It's not turned one way or the other. Then tighten down that screw. Okay, with the needle bar timed, raise the needle bar to its highest position, and we're going to put the throat plate on. And you'll notice that it's got this guide built into it here, that this finger at the top of your bobbin race, the little finger at the top of the bobbin race, you might be able to see it right there, is going to fit between the two sides of this. It's going to fit right into that slot there. So this finger should be directly up. When you slide this on, that finger should be trapped in between the two sides, and it is. See that right here? You can see that finger in between the two sides of that channel. Then you can put your screws back in, and that part of it is done. Desert Zephyrs are closing my door, so I think we're going to just have to work with the door closed rather than try to prop it open. How's that? Good. And your face plate can go back on. There's a slot here in the side of your face plate for your take-up lever. So you want to put that in there first. And then there's a little slot in the top of the cover that sets on this screw here. So take up lever through that slot, and then this slot on top of that screw. And I think it's this screw. No, I think it's this one. I think it's the smaller of the thumb screws that goes in the face plate. Just looks right. If not, I'll let you know. Let's see, we oiled this earlier, but I'm going to put a little more oil in the top here. You see it's got an oil hole here over that bearing. It's got an oil hole here over this bearing, and it's got a cam that rides in that fork, and you want to put some oil on that cam, and you want to put a little bit of grease on that gear. And when I say a little bit of grease, I mean a little bit of grease, because centrifugal force as the machine spins is going to throw off any excess grease, and it'll just make a mess in there. So you want a little dab and the 4 cardinal points of the compass. So a quarter of the way around. Put a little dab in each quarter of the gear. And that's enough. Any more is just mess waiting to happen. Work that in a little bit. It's already oozing out. And that part that oozes out is just going to get spun off. So spread it around a little more. Then this cover goes back on here. And there's a round-headed screw that holds it in place. So it's got to be this other round-headed screw here, just like that. The other one's a little bit too small. Yeah, that was just right. And that's all that holds this cover on. It's made so you can just loosen the screw and turn the cover to get in there, oil it, and grease it. Okay. Remember, we took this lever out. We didn't clean it yet, so it's got some dirt and oil in the grooves there, so I'm going to go out and clean it in the alcohol bath. So be right back.